Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Let's just wait a minute or two for a couple more people to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, let's get started. So today I'm going to teach you a little bit about how to create your website using HTML, who were present in the GitHub 101 tutorial. You might have taken a little bit of a look at how websites are structured, but in this course, we're going to go a little bit deeper into how to actually create a website. So you guys can follow along with me. And by the end of this hour tutorial, you guys should be able to create your own basic website. So yeah, let's get started. So in a website, there are usually three main documents: the index.html file, the main.js file, and the style.css file. So if you're following along, why don't you create these files in a new folder? All you have to do is right-click, create a new text document, and you can just title it index.html, and main.js and style.css, and you should be able to create these different files. So once you have that, does someone have a question? I think someone's unmuted. No? Okay. I'll keep going then. So once you have these files, now let's edit the content of them. So if you don't have a text editor like Visual Studio Code or Notepad++, then I'd recommend getting one of those real quick. And if you do have them, you should be able to open these files with that text editor. And I created some pre-created code, but you should see three blank documents. I'll now go into a little bit of what each of these files do. The index.html file is the main structure of your website. It creates the elements. When you go onto a website, you'll, like, all the paragraphs, headers, images, all of that is created in HTML. The style.css file is what creates the way that the page looks. So if you have a different colored font, or maybe an image's size, all of that is changed using CSS. And finally, the JavaScript, the main.js file, edits the functionality of the website, and a little bit more advanced JavaScript can do things like send forms or manage data. But you can also do more simple things like create simple functions that do different things on your website. And we'll get into that a little bit later. First, I'd like to take a look at the index.html file. And I have a little bit of pre-selected code that I have for you here. And this is sort of the skeleton of your website. Pretty much every website is going to have these basic elements. First, I'd like to mention the way that HTML is set up is through tags. You're going to always have an opening tag and a closing tag. Notice that the HTML tag has an opening tag, and then down here it has a closing tag, and everything in that tag is what's shown on the page. And the way you can tell if something's an opening tag or a closing tag, it's an opening tag. It doesn't have this / before whatever it is that the tag is. So this is the opening head tag, and that's the closing head tag. This is the opening header tag. This is the closing header tag. And so that's just a little bit about the basic structure of HTML. Now I'll go into a little bit of what each of these commands do. So in the head tag right here, you're going to put all of your site information. This most of the time isn't seen by your user. When a person goes to a page, they often never see this. It's more for things like search engines and things like that to understand what your page is about. But it's still very important to know what that does. For example, I'd like to talk about the title tag, because that's possibly one of the more important ones. So in a title tag, let's give my page a title. Let's just call it my page title. And so if
how did he create index.html?
Oh, okay.
I'll type it in the chat. Where's the chat?
So all you have to do to create index.html is right-click either on your desktop or in a folder, create new text document, and then just delete new text document and type in index.html, and it'll say that I already have one of those, but let's say I'll name it index1.html, and that'll be your index.html document.
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that?
If you open Notepad
for Mac, and how would you do it on Mac?
So let's see. I don't own a Mac. I think it should be a similar process.
Yeah, on Mac you could open the text edit application, and then when you go to save it, you could hit all files and then just add .html in the end.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Let me know if that works.
I'd recommend using Atom or Sublime though, rather than text edit, because it'll actually do your syntax coloring too.
Okay. So yeah, if you have that, then I'll keep going. So when you have these three documents and you add a title to that to the head, you'll notice that when you double click on index.html, it should take you to your browser. But if that's Chrome, Safari, whatever you use as your browser, and it'll take you to your web page. And if you notice at the top on the page title, should show the title that you put inside the title tag. So if we create a new title and save that, and when you reload, then that title will appear there. So that's a very important tag that you'll use often. Another example of a head tag is the link rel equals icon tag. This shows that little icon on the tab, and if you want, you can just take any any image and paste the URL of that image inside this href. Href equals blank, and that'll tell your page to pull the image. Let's see, I picked this slice of pizza before we started, and if I put the href right there, then it'll show that icon as your page icon. So that's important as well with branding and creating a site. So now that we've gone through those two, I'd like to also talk about the description. This is important for Google searches. If you search something on Google, there's usually the Google. Here, I can. Actually, I wanted to Google search that. So this will usually be your site title using the title tag in the blue there, and all of that text is the description. And so the way to change that text is right here. Meta name equals description, content equals. This is my site description. And finally, the last thing that we're going to put in the head is link rel equals style sheet, href equals style.css. And this, the only function this has is to call our style.css file so that we know that we are linking these two together, and everything, all of the styles, the code that we write here is going to be applied to the items on this page. And so that'll come in handy when we want to change the way that our page looks later on. Is everybody caught up, or do you have any questions at this point? See, I can't see the chat, so if you have any questions, go ahead and unmute. Okay, so yeah, let's keep going. So the next thing we're going to talk about is
sorry to interrupt. But,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I wanted to create an app instead of a website, how would I do that on VS Code?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure that that's really an easy task. What
Okay.
Are you developing? What are you developing with?
We're looking to create an app that is based on like helping students like schedule times with teachers.
Yeah, for app development, I personally use Android Studio. I don't use VS Code. It's a completely separate thing. Yeah, and that's also.
Like,
go ahead.
oh, sorry, you could use stuff like Wakanda, which is you can actually use HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all that kind of fun stuff using JavaScript for your user actions in the app, and export it for iOS, Android, any platform, and make like a responsive site that'll resize. Or you could use stuff like Flutter.
Okay, got
I think
it.
even in Android Studio, you could use stuff like this.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you have any further questions about that, then feel free to contact any of our mentors. They're usually available, so I'm sure they'd be happy to help. But yeah, to keep going, let's now talk about the main content of our page. I'm going to kind of rapid fire a few important tags at you. The first one is the header, page one. This is a header, and if you save that and open our page, then you now have a header on your web page. paragraph tag. You can add paragraph. And it'll show paragraph on your page. Another thing with a header, you can have subheaders as well, H2 all the way, H2, H3, H4, and so on. And so this can be helpful in sectioning off your page. The next thing I'm going to add is the image tag. And here again, I found an image before we started. I'm just going to use you would put the URL of whatever image you're using into the source, and it'll pull from that, and you'll have an image on your site. You might notice that this doesn't look very aesthetically pleasing, and that's what CSS is for, and I'll go into that a little bit more a little bit later on. But to continue with the different useful tags that we have, there's lists, unordered lists and ordered lists. You can have bullet points and numbered lists. And it looks kind of like that. To item 3, and you can have a bullet pointed list. You can also have an ordered list where it's numbered. All you have to do is change that to OL for ordered list. And now you have a numbered list on there. Let's see what else can we add. We can add a link. Let's say we want to add a link to Google to our website. All we would have to do is add something called an anchor tag. And add href. So we're pointing to a certain location, and I'm just going to put in Google.com. And when you click that link, it should take you to Google. So yeah, these are some of the most important elements. If you go onto most major websites, you'll see many of these embedded in there somewhere. And as you create your own website, these will be some of the most important elements that you have as well. But now let's get a little bit more into how to make the page look a little better. This doesn't really look like a professional website. You might want to do make the text bigger or smaller. You might want to make that image look a little bit better so it's not going off the page. Change the font size, change the color, change backgrounds. So we're going to do that in the CSS. So the first thing we have to do is create a way to point the CSS to specific elements. And the way we're going to do that, or one way you can do that, is give your element an ID. So let's say that you want your header. Let's say our goal is to make the header green. All we would have to do is give it an ID of whatever. Header, let's call it my header. And then what you'd have to do in the CSS, use the pound sign to note that you're calling an ID. So my header, and everything that you put in these brackets will affect the header. So let's make the color of the header green. Let's So all we have to do, color refers to the text color. And when we reload, you'll notice that our header is green. Say we want to make it a little bit bigger. What we would have to do is set the font size to 40 pixels. And now we have a bigger header, and you can play around with this on your own. And there's a lot of different things you can do, and this is just sort of the beginning. But yeah, these are some of the most useful and important commands with CSS. So yeah, now that we can call an element within ID, there's actually a stipulation to the ID. You can only have one item per page with a certain ID. So you can't have another object have the same ID. So doing that is not good. That won't work. Refrain from doing this because each ID can only be used once per page. However, if you did want your style to affect multiple items, let's say you wanted to affect all of the items in this unordered list, what you can do is call the li for list item, and you would say li color, make it blue, and now every list item on your page will be blue. And so that's another way to call different items on your page. And the third one that I'd like to talk about, let's say we didn't want every list item on our page to be blue, but only specific ones, maybe only the ones that say item 2 and item 3, but we don't want the item 1s to be blue, we want them to stay black. Then what we can do is we can give them a class name. And we do that by adding an attribute to the object, class equals blue text. And then we can add that to all of the items that we want. And to select all of the items with a class name, use the dot blue text, and we can set the color to blue, and you'll notice that only the items that we gave the class name to are going to be blue. That might have been a little bit fast. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself if you do have any.
Not a question, more of a comment. I threw some resources in the main chat, the Discord, for the kid who was asking earlier about AppDev.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and yeah,
Okay.
if you if you have any. Okay.
Is there a way you can resize pictures?
Yeah, I'll go over that next. There's actually a few different ways you can resize pictures. So let's call the image tag. There's only one image on our page right now, so we can just say image, and we can set the width to something. And here's where you have a couple different options. You can set the width to a specific width, like 500 pixels, and it'll only ever be 500 pixels. But you also have a few different options as well. So let's set the width to 500 pixels. When you reload the page, it'll be a set width, but you notice that when you make the window a different size, the picture stays the same width. And that's because it's set absolutely to 500 and it'll never change. But let's say you didn't want that. Let's say you wanted more of a responsive website that works on both mobile and desktop. The way to do that would be to do something like, let's do 70%. And what that's going to do is it'll make the picture always equal, or the width of the picture always equal to 70% of its container width. And in this case, the container is the entire screen. So the picture will always be 70% of the entire screen. So now when we reload, you'll notice that when we have a different window size, the picture gets bigger and smaller, and there's always 30% of the screen that is blank. And the picture is 70% of the screen width. So you can also do the same thing for the height. You usually don't want to set the width and the height. If you do, it'll act kind of funny. The aspect ratio will be off and it'll look kind of like that. So if you only set one, then it'll automatically set the other for you in the same aspect ratio. And there are one or two circumstances where you might want to set both, but I won't go into that. For now, only set one of them. But yeah, you can set the height as well. Set the height to 400 pixels, or if you want it to be dependent on the screen height, let's say you want an image that always covers 100% of the screen, you can set it to 100 VH, which stands for 100% of the view height. And when you reload that, you'll notice that although the image is actually offset by a little bit, it's actually perfectly 100% of my my view, or my page, like the visible part of my page here, that height. And so that's a good way to resize images. And there's a couple of other things you can do as well. For example, for text and images, you can center it by adding text align center. Let's see. Oh, and I added that to the blue text. I need to add that up here. And the header is centered, and you can do that for pretty much any item that you want. So yeah, CSS commands are all pretty straightforward one-line commands that make sense. You might have to look up how to do something every once in a while. Even I still do that every now and then. But CSS really is mainly a memorization thing. And as you get better at web design, it'll come more naturally and you'll pick up more and more different commands. Are there any questions at this point?
Yeah, so I came in late. Did you cover JavaScript yet?
No, I did not. I'm actually going into that next, but I wanted to see if anybody had any questions on the HTML or CSS right now.
Okay. So how do people know which things to put on the website.
Oh, could you
Like
explain
on
your question?
like on the HTML and
Mhm.
on the CSS.
So yeah, so each tag corresponds to a different element that you have on your page. So for example, the H1 tag adds a header, which if you notice this text in here, this is a header is shown right here. This is a head. This is the tag that creates that element. And then you have your H2 tag, which is a subheader, and that creates that subheader here. You have the paragraph and so on and so on. I can, in the Discord, send an HTML and CSS cheat sheet as well, so that once you kind of understand the basic structure of HTML and CSS, you can take a look at that to kind of find the exact commands that you're looking for.
Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, let's jump into some basic JavaScript. JavaScript can be useful for many things, but in our case, we're going to be using it to do simple things to make the website perform a little better. So let's say we wanted the website to respond to whatever the user is doing. For example, let's say we added, let's say we clicked on the header. So what we would do for that is a command that'll be really helpful for JavaScript is document .get element by ID. And what that does is it scrapes the HTML document and finds the element with the ID of whatever you put here. So I'm going to say document.get element by ID my header. And whatever you do right here, that'll affect this header element. So for example, you can JavaScript is powerful because it can also add HTML and CSS attributes. So let's say in JavaScript we wanted to make the element green instead of putting it in the CSS. So if we take it out there and reload the page, it'll turn back to black. And using JavaScript, we can and we can set the color there. And that'll be useful. That document.get element by ID will be useful in many cases. And for what we want to do something when we click on the header, that's what we're going to use. So the command that we're going to use is add event listener. Event listener. And then we're going to pass in a couple of attributes. So click, function. That might seem like kind of a lot, but pretty much all this is saying is when that element is clicked, is going to occur whenever this element is clicked. So why don't we change the color when it's clicked? So we can use that same command we did earlier, document.get element by ID, my header .style .color equals blue. And now when we click that, it turns blue. And that right there is very powerful in a couple of different ways. That's oftentimes the basis of how forms are sent in some cases. I'm not sure if you've done any like online quiz type things, but some of the simple online quizzes can be used with that. And so, yeah, that can be a very powerful function. So yeah, are there any questions so far before I keep going? One thing that I'm not sure if you guys picked up, and I should have gone over this a little bit earlier, but make sure that in your HTML, like we linked the style.css right here in the head, make sure that you also, right before you end the body tag, which is the main content of your page, make sure that you link the JavaScript to your page as well, using that command right there. And script, you're getting a script at a source or at the location of main.js, which if you have the file structure, it's just looking at main.js. And that will include all of that code to your HTML page. Am I okay to keep going, or do you have any questions? Or even things that you'd like to know how to do?
So what does the JavaScript syntax look like? Like that?
Yeah. I can go a little bit more into sort of the traditional programming syntax, like declaring variables and if statements and that type of thing. But yeah, this is something that this is something like a quick little JavaScript integration with HTML, and that syntax is what you would do to create to create like an on-click event. Like when you click on the header, it turns into a different color. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I'll go into a little bit more of the traditional programming syntax in JavaScript. So to declare a variable, you would do var x equals, and then whatever, you can set that as a number, you can set that to a string. I'm just going to set it to 0. And you can, let's set var y equals 1. And another useful command that x plus y. And actually, one thing, remember to put semicolons at the end of the line. Sometimes your program might not be happy with you if you forget it. Sometimes it's okay, but it's good to always put those in. So in our function, so when we click the header, let's also, in addition to turning the element blue, let's also run this code of setting x to 0, setting y to 1, and alerting x plus y, which should alert 1. And let's see what happens here. When we click it, it turns blue. And let's see what happened there. Oh, you know what? Let's do it. Or way to do this would be and this is what, and yeah, that's what an alert would look like. And so when you declare variables, you can use the alert function to output, and that's useful because in more intricate programs, you can have the page alert something so that you know what the program is doing at that time.
How might you be able to make like a text entry box or something like that?
Yeah, so that would be in HTML. Let's see, I can just put that under here. There's actually a couple of different ways to do that, but if you're thinking of more like a big text box, that's just a text area. And that'll look like this, and the user can make it bigger, can resize, and the user can type in whatever they want there. And actually, something else that you can, this is where JavaScript gets to be kind of useful. You can, like, let's say you set the ID of that equal to that.
What's the difference between ID and class?
So for an ID, you can only have one of a single ID. So if you have the text area with an ID of test box, you cannot create another element with that same ID. A class name can be reused, and this is important in CSS. This is the ID selector, and this right here is the class selector. If you want, say, a style to affect a whole bunch of different items, you can give all of those items a class name that then is affected by one set of commands. So for example, what we did here of giving the class name of blue text to all of these list items and then making each of those ones blue, we were able to, in CSS, use to collect all of those elements with the class name of blue text and use one line to set all of their colors to blue. On the other hand, the ID for the header one, ID equals my header. You can only have one of those. So all of the code that you put in here will only ever be able to affect that one item. So the way to kind of differentiate whether or not you want to use ID or the class name, if you plan to have multiple of the same item, let's say you want all of your paragraphs to have the same style, then I would use a class name, right? But if let's say you only have one header one on the page, then you'd want to use an ID because that's the only one and you're only targeting one object. Does that make sense? No comment, so I'll assume so, and I'll move on then. Here, give me 1 second. Okay. But before I move on, does anybody have any questions as to what they'd like to learn how to do? Maybe like the text area we added, either functionality or maybe styling or types of elements that you'd like to see.
Would it be able to turn that? Would it be possible to turn that text box into like an input which you could interpret in JavaScript?
Yeah. So the way we would do that is actually not with a text area. We would use an input type equals text. And here we can, let's say, set the ID equal to my input and set the, and here, yeah, we'll just do that for now. And that'll create just a normal text entry field. You can also set a placeholder. So that the person knows what to put, and then when you start typing in, the placeholder goes away. And so then what you can do is through JavaScript, let's say when, let's get this code back. When we click the header, let's alert whatever we wrote in here, and this is where we can get the text inside of a text box. So we can do document.getElement by ID. My input, and let's try to just actually, we're going to need to alert document.getElement by ID my input dot value, and that should alert whatever text we have in this text box. So I need actually here. And when we click that, then it shows my new text. So if you wanted to put that in a variable instead of alerting it, I used an alert to show that we got the value of the input, but you can set that input to, you can set that to a variable, and now you can use that variable to do whatever it is that you're planning to do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Okay. So actually, yeah, well, yeah, also along the same lines, we can for things like forms or even just links, we can create a button, and you can either create a button using in anchor, which is like a link, or you can add a button element. And that'll create a button that then you can, using the document helpful as well for getting user input. So yeah, I'd like to go into a little bit more about styling your page. This still does a link I have there. There are a few ways to make that look better. So yeah, let's get rid of some of the things I have here. And actually, one thing I forgot to mention is when these tags up here, the header and the footer, if you go to any major website, apple.com, say, they have things like a menu bar, and that's usually the header, which is different from the head. It's easy to get those two confused. The header is where the navigation bar and your logo and those types of things go, whereas the head is sort of almost back-end, but not really back-end information about your website, including the title, the icon, and that type of thing. What was that? I'm sorry, I didn't catch what you said. Could you repeat that? Okay. Yeah. If you have a question, feel free to unmute or let me know. Yeah. So the header is usually where the menu bar goes, and the footer likewise is where menu bar spaces have maybe a map of your location, and the reason for these, or one of the main reasons, is that usually if you have multiple pages on your website, this will remain the same throughout your website, right? If you go, I'll use my example of Apple. If you go to another page, then that header is still exactly the same, and that footer is still exactly the same. So yeah, those are two very important elements that I forgot to mention that are useful for creating your website. Well, one other thing that I'd like to go over is, yeah, what if you do have multiple pages? But I'll get to that. But let's do a little bit more with CSS before we go over that. So for a couple more CSS items that we have, let's give this link an ID of my link, and let's say that we want to make it look more like a real button. Let's see here. One second. Sorry for the background noise. So yeah, what we would do is use the ID of my link, and get, and we can add a few attributes to that. Let's say we don't want it underlined, which many links aren't going to be. We would add text decoration none, and it's not underlined. One thing that actually is often used is something called margin and padding. These are actually very, very important to any website, both for like this link and for the image and these text, the paragraph and the subheader. It's slammed right up against the edge, and it shouldn't be. So what we can do is add to the link either padding or margin. There's a little bit of a difference. So actually, here would be a good time to. So if you right click on any page and go to inspect, you should be able to see all of the content of the page. So if you notice, we have our head with all the information about the page. We have the body, which holds the header and all of the text or all the content, and the footer, just like we have in our code. But you'll also notice, and actually, if you take the selector and select the link that we created, you'll notice this box. And this is a really useful box. This is our element in the middle. And then we have padding, which, let's say we add, went down here. Let's say we add some padding to the left of it, 10 pixels. Then you'll notice that now it has a little bit of padding to the right or to the left, right here. If we increase that to 100 pixels, now there's a lot more. The border, you can add like a solid border around elements and a margin. The difference between padding and margin being that padding is, as you can see here, inside of the border, whereas margin is outside of the border. So yeah, this is really important to creating a website to make sure that everything is spaced out and not slammed against other objects. So yeah, on our kind of quest to create a more professional looking button, let's make the font size a little bit bigger. And actually, I'd like to get rid of the image for now. We don't really need that. There we go. Let's see, let's center it. And let's see. Let's see, give me a second here. This should, oh, okay, yeah, we hold that for now. Let's add some padding as we just talked about. If you just set padding to 10 pixels, say, it'll give 10 pixels of padding to the top, the right, the bottom, and the left. If you add 20 pixels, same thing, 20 pixels to the top, right, bottom, and left. But you can also do this, which like 20 pixels, 10 pixels, and that'll add 20 pixels to the top and bottom and 10 to the left and right, or even 20, 10, 5, 0, which will give 20 to the top, 10 to the right, 5 to the bottom, and 0 to the left. So actually, and if you inspect element, you'll notice that we have 20 on the top, 10 on the right, 5 on the bottom, and 0 on the left. So actually, we seem to be running out of time, so I'll go a little bit quicker through this next part. And at the end, I'll have a little bit of time for some questions. One thing that would be helpful at first, let's make the color black. One thing that's colorful for any responses, the hover selector. And that just means that we're going to give this style to my link when color blue. And that means that whenever we hover over the link, it'll be blue. And that's really helpful to let the user know, okay, you're now hovering over this image or this element. And if you click on it, then we're going to take you a smoother transition to by adding transition. I'll make it long 1 second. And it sort of flows in and out as opposed to it turning blue automatically. So yeah, you can play around with that a little bit more. Add different attributes when it's being hovered over versus when it's not. And yeah, so the last thing I'd like to go over before I open it up to any questions is creating multiple pages. Let's say I wanted to create another page to my website instead of the index, which is kind of like the home page. So let's say I created page 2.html. And if you don't have Visual Studio Code, inside of your folder, you can create a new text document as well and call that page 2.html. Yes, you want to change that and open that up as well. So how can you link the two? That's a big thing that you might want to do when creating a multi-page website. If both of these are in the same folder, you can create a, and actually here, why don't we copy all of this code to our second page, except let's delete all of that. So our first page has all of the content that we've been working on, and the second page just has the header. And why don't we give it a different header? Header for page 2. And so instead of having this link go to Google, let's have it go to our second page. And we can do that by, instead of doing HTTPS, whatever, we can just do /page2.html. And when we click on our link, then, there. And then when we click on the link, then it goes from index to page 2. So, and then let's say we wanted a way to go back. We can do the same thing here, except point it toward index. And now we can go back and forth between it. So yeah, and one other thing, notice that multiple different pages can point towards the same JavaScript and CSS file, so that your entire website can be working with the same script and styles, so you don't have to be creating a new one for every page. That would become tedious. So yeah, you can use the same commands to point the style sheet and script files respectively. So yeah, that's all that I have for you. Do you have any questions? Anything that you want to know before we get going? If not, and if you think of other questions, I'll be available in the Discord. You can either ask a mentor, you can message me directly, or put something into the questions area of our Discord. And yeah, thank you guys for coming. We also have a GitHub 201 tutorial or a Q&A tomorrow where you can learn more about how to further integrate your HTML page with GitHub and how to work a little bit more with hosting that. Oh, looks like we have, yeah. So yeah, that's all I have. Thank you guys for coming. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions.